On June 28, 2015, at 10 o'clock 40 minutes in the morning, a group of volunteer canine searchers were combing a swampy lowland in the Lolo National Forest, Montana. A search dog stopped near a thick, muddy lens, locally known as the Black Trap, and began barking furiously. What the rescuers first thought were old, dry driftwood sticking out of the mire turned out to be the soles of hiking boots. 24-year-old Maya Thorne was trapped underground in an upright position, head down, like a driven pile. The forest had swallowed her up 2 weeks ago, but the condition in which her body was found made even veteran police officers shudder. It couldn't have been done by an animal, and it couldn't have been an accident. Someone had used a terrible, unnatural force to wipe the girl off the face of the earth. Here is the first chapter of the story, written in accordance with your assignment. In Ukrainian, in a documentary style, in compliance with the requirements for volume, numerals, and the measurement system. On June 14, 2015, the morning in western Montana was cool as summer. The fog descending from the Bitterroot Mountains had not yet cleared when the silver asphalt of Highway 12 began to fill with the first cars. A bright yellow Jeep Wrangler with Washington state license plates stood out among the usual lumberjack pickups and truckers. Behind the wheel was 24-year-old Maya Thorne, an ambitious assistant director from Seattle. She hadn't come here for a vacation. Her goal was a job that required precision, care, and, as it turned out, fatal courage. Maya was looking for a model for an independent Western. The script called for specific locations: abandoned sawmills, dilapidated bridges, and textured forested streams where no tourist had set foot in years. She was looking for a wild, untouched beauty that would become the backdrop for a dark movie story. In her notebook were several notes made after studying satellite maps, and one of them led deep into the Lolo National Forest, an area known for its difficult routes and lack of cell service. At 8 hours and 30 minutes in the morning, the yellow Jeep pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Zay Canyon Diner, a roadside cafe located near the Lolo Hot Springs. It was a typical place to stop. The smell of frying bacon, dim lighting, and regular customers who knew each other by name. A waitress named Brenda, who was on duty that morning, would later give a detailed statement to the police. She remembered the visitor well because she was very different from the locals. According to Brenda, the girl was wearing a stylish but practical denim jacket, dark pants, and sturdy boots. She ordered only black coffee without sugar and immediately laid out detailed topographic maps on the table. Maya did not look confused. On the contrary, she was focused and businesslike. At one point, she called over a waitress and began asking about the condition of the old logging roads running north from Graves Creek. She wondered if an SUV would be able to get through there, and if there were any remnants of old loggers' huts in that area. The waitress also mentioned that Maya had briefly talked to a few local men at the next table, clarifying the route. None of them made her feel anxious. She behaved confidently, like a person who is used to being in control. After finishing her coffee, she left a $3 tip on the table, collected her cards, and went outside. At 9 o'clock 45 minutes, CCTV cameras installed at a gas station a mile away from the cafe captured Maya Thorne's car for the last time. The grainy footage shows the yellow Jeep turning on its left turn signal and leaving the smooth asphalt of Route 12 for a narrow gravel road leading deep into a wooded area. The car slowly disappeared behind a wall of centuries-old pines. This was Maya's last confirmed contact with the civilized world. The girl's plan was to return to the city of Missoula that evening. She booked a room at the Riverside Inn for 2 nights. The motel manager, 60-year-old Mr. Henderson, later told investigators that Maya had warned him about her late return, but promised to be there by 10 p.m. When the clock struck midnight and the brightly colored SUV did not appear in the parking lot, Henderson did not raise the alarm, figuring that the young woman might have gotten stuck in another city or changed her plans. The worry began only the next day. On June 15th, when the checkout time had passed and Maya's room remained empty and untouched since she left, the receptionist tried to call her. The phone was silent. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach the guest, he dialed the Missoula police. An official missing persons report was registered at 18 hours and 30 minutes. The search operation began on the morning of June 16th. The Missoula County Police, together with rangers from the U.S. Forest Service, began to work out the route that Maya had talked about in the cafe. The orientation to the bright yellow SUV was sent to all patrols. The first results came faster than expected, but they did not bring relief. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the pilot of the search helicopter spotted a yellow spot among the dense green of the coniferous forest. The coordinates pointed to a spot about 9 miles off the main highway, in a rugged area where old logging roads had become a maze of eroded tracks. It took the ground rescue team almost 2 hours to get there. What they saw raised more questions than answers. Maya Thorne's Jeep Wrangler was tilted, stuck with its front axle in a deep gully hidden by tall grass and puddles from recent rainstorms. The car looked undamaged except for the mud on the wheels and bumper. The engine was cold. The police officer who first approached the car noted strange details in his report. The driver's door was flung wide open, as if the driver had jumped out of the car in a hurry. The keys were still in the ignition, in the on position, but the battery was completely dead, probably due to the headlights or radio being on and running until they ran out of power. The interior was in relative order. On the passenger seat was the same half-drunk glass with the Z Canyon Diner logo that the waitress had mentioned. Topographic maps with markers were neatly folded nearby. A light jacket and a bottle of water were found in the back seat. But the most important thing was missing. Maya's professional camera, which, according to her colleagues, she never parted with while working, was missing from the car. Her backpack with personal belongings was also missing. Maya Thorne herself disappeared without a trace. Investigators and volunteers cordoned off the scene. Dog handlers let the dogs follow the trail, but the dense, damp forest and the rains that had fallen the night before washed away the scents. The main version put forward by the police in the first hours sounded logical. An inexperienced driver got stuck off-road, tried to drive off on her own, ran out of battery and, panicked, went on foot to look for help, but got lost in the thicket. Over the next 2 weeks, dozens of people combed the Lolo forest. They checked every ravine, every cave, and every abandoned hunting lodge within a 10-mile radius of the car. Volunteers shouted Maya's name, hoping to hear a response. But the forest was silent. No footprints, no broken branches to indicate the direction of travel, no scraps of clothing. It was as if the girl had vanished into thin air a step away from her car. An experienced tracker involved in the search on the third day noticed one detail near the car that did not fit into the picture of the lost girl. A trail was barely visible on the soft ground near the open door of the Jeep, but it did not lead to a road or forest. It ended abruptly, as if someone or something had forced Maya to stop right in front of her own car. On June 28, 2015, the operation to find Maya Thorne entered a critical stage, which police protocols dryly refer to as the passive phase. The hope of finding the girl alive melted away with the morning fog over the Bitterroot Mountains. 2 weeks of intensive combing of the forest, The involvement of aircraft and dozens of volunteers yielded no results, except for a few false tracks. The official resources of the sheriff's department were exhausted, and the leadership made the difficult decision to reduce the number of patrols, leaving the case to investigators. However, a group of volunteer dog handlers who had arrived from the neighboring state of Idaho refused to close the camp. The team leader, an experienced rescue worker, decided to check the last, unexplored sector, marked on the maps as a high-risk area. It was a swampy lowland near an old, long-destroyed beaver dam, located about 2 miles northeast of where Maya's Jeep was found. The locals avoided the area, calling it Rotten Corner because of the dangerous mud lenses and accumulation of standing water. The summer of 2015 in Montana was abnormally wet. Frequent downpours turned the lowlands into a viscous mess, covered with a deceptive layer of bright green moss and tall grass. It was extremely difficult to move around. Every step was accompanied by a loud smacking sound, and my feet were bogged down to the bone in the black silt. The air was heavy, full of the smell of decay and damp earth, and clouds of mosquitoes did not give rest to either people or animals. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the group moved along the shoreline of the dry riverbed. A search dog named Barney, a golden retriever who specialized in finding bodies, suddenly changed his behavior. He left the trail and headed for the center of a large, muddy clearing that looked like a perfectly flat plateau amidst the chaos of fallen trees. Barney stopped at the edge of a deep mud hole and began to emit a distinctive, alarming bark that the dog handlers could not confuse with anything else. It was a signal of a find. When the rescuers approached the spot with ropes, they did not understand at first what the dog was reacting to. The surface of the mud seemed unmoving, with only one spot where something that looked like 2 short pieces of old wood or roots stuck out of the black, oily slime. One of the volunteers, coming close, leaned down to examine the object and abruptly pulled away. What they thought were driftwood turned out to be the soles of trekking boots with the distinctive vibram tread. The boots were pointing up to the sky. It became clear that there was a person under the layer of mud. The body was in a strictly upright position, head down, completely submerged in the mire. On the surface, under the rays of the morning sun, only the heels and part of the corrugated sole were visible. The radio came to life at 10 o'clock 42 minutes. The code transmitted by the volunteers prompted the sheriff and the forensic team to immediately head to the old dam. The process of retrieving the body turned into a grueling, hours-long operation. The viscous mud worked like a powerful vacuum, holding its victim tightly. Attempts to simply pull the legs could have damaged the remains, so the rescuers had to manually dig out the area around the body, standing waist-deep in the mud, using sapper shovels and even their own hands. The atmosphere at the site was depressing. The men worked in silence, interrupted only by short commands. The deeper they dug, the more frightening the picture became. It was as if Maya Thorne's body had been driven into the ground with enormous force. Dirt filled every fold of her clothes, preserving her body in an oxygen-free environment. When the body was finally lifted onto solid ground and placed on a sanitary tarp, the forensic experts present immediately noticed a detail that completely destroyed any suggestion of an accident or fall. It was not the posture of a person who was floundering, trying to get out. Maya's arms were stretched out along her torso, pressed tightly against her hips. Such a position is unnatural for a person falling head first. The instinct of self-preservation makes you put your arms forward for protection. But the most important discovery awaited the experts when they examined the wrists in detail. The skin, despite being exposed to moisture, clearly showed deep strangulation furrows. These were traces of a rope or wire that tied the girl's hands behind her back or along her body at the time of the dive. The rope itself was not found on the body. Probably it was made of natural material that could not withstand 2 weeks in the aggressive, acidic environment of the swamp, or the knot was untied under the pressure of the mud, and the fetters remained somewhere deep at the bottom of the mud pit. The state of the body caused shock even for a pathologist with 20 years of experience. Vertical immersion to a depth of more than 5 feet in a substance of such density required the application of enormous force from above. A person is physically incapable of diving that deep into the mud on their own, and even a strong man could not have pushed his body with his hands to that depth without leaving traces of struggle around him. The investigator, looking at the black hole from which Maya had just been pulled, realized that they were dealing with more than just a murder. The manner of burial pointed to something mechanical, cold, and ruthless. Someone or something had literally pushed the girl into the ground like a nail into soft wood. Friends, before we continue to dive into the darkest details of this investigation, I ask you to do one simple but important thing. Support this channel. Please click the subscribe button, like this video, and write any comment below it. It is your activity that signals to YouTube's algorithms to promote this content so that as many people as possible can see Maya Thorne's story. Your engagement helps the channel live and grow. Thank you. After the gruesome discovery in the swamp, the status of the case changed instantly. It was no longer a search for a missing person who might have gotten lost or injured. It was an investigation into a brutal murder with aggravating circumstances. The manner in which the body was hidden, driven vertically into the dirt like a construction pile, indicated the perpetrator's particular rage or cold calculation. The detectives realized that the person who did it knew the area well and was probably still nearby. The investigative team returned to the starting point of Maya's route, the roadside cafe Zay Canyon Diner. Now that the tragic ending was known, the testimonies of staff and patrons took on a new, ominous weight. The waitress Brenda and 2 regular customers who were re-interviewed on June 29 pointed to the same person who had previously fallen through the cracks due to lack of evidence. All the witnesses stated that on the morning of June 14th, while Maya was having breakfast, she was shown an unhealthy interest in a local man, 40-year-old Travis, whose name was initially withheld for the sake of the investigation. Travis had a reputation in the neighborhood as an eccentric recluse and a man with a troubled temper. He had a history of being called to the police for disorderly conduct, bar fights, and public order violations. He lived outside the city limits, in an old, dilapidated trailer hidden in the woods, just a few miles from where Maya's abandoned Jeep was later found. According to eyewitnesses, Travis was acting obsessively that morning. He sat down at a nearby table, loudly commented on the girl's appearance, and tried to strike up a conversation, offering to show her real, wild places that were not on the maps. Maya, according to the waitress, responded politely but coldly, trying to ignore the unwanted interlocutor. When she left the cafe, Travis followed her out just a few minutes later. This time, window fitted perfectly with the investigation's version of events. He could have followed her, waited for her to turn onto a deserted road, and attacked her when she got stuck in the mud. After receiving this testimony, the police immediately organized a raid. A takedown team consisting of 2 crews of sheriff's deputies and detectives arrived at Travis's trailer on the evening of June 29th. The suspect's home was a depressing sight, a rusting trailer surrounded by mountains of trash, old car parts, and empty bottles. Travis was taken by surprise. During the arrest, he behaved extremely aggressively, shouting at the officers, trying to resist, and claiming that he did not understand the reason for the visit. His behavior only increased suspicions. The man was taken to the police station in handcuffs for questioning, while forensic experts began a detailed search of his home. What was found inside the trailer seemed to the investigators to be direct evidence of guilt. Among the junk, dirty clothes, and piles of old newspapers, detectives found a black digital camera. It looked very similar to the professional camera that, according to colleagues and family, Maya Thorne was carrying and that disappeared from her car. The find was immediately packed in an evidence bag. It looked like a classic trophy, a victim's possession that the killer kept as a memento. During the interrogation, Travis was confused in his testimony. When the detectives asked him about the events of the morning of June 14th, he was unable to provide a clear alibi. At first, he claimed to have slept until lunch, then changed his story and said that he had gone to check hunting traps in the woods, but could not pinpoint the exact location. His nervousness, aggression, and inability to explain his movements during critical hours led detectives to believe they had caught the killer. Information about the suspect's arrest was immediately leaked to the press. Local newspapers and TV channels ran headlines about the monster of the Lolo forest. Public opinion had already passed judgment. For people, everything fit into a perfect, albeit horrifying, picture. A lonely girl, a reclusive local with a criminal record, refusal to meet, persecution, and brutal murder in the middle of nowhere. The found camera became the main argument in this version. The detectives felt victorious. They had a motive. They had an opportunity. They had a suspect without an alibi, and as they thought, they had the main piece of evidence. Only one formality remained: the technical examination of the found camera, which was to finally solidify the accusation. Experts in the laboratory connected the device to a computer to view the contents of the memory card, expecting to see the last pictures of Maya Thorne. But what appeared on the monitor made the investigators freeze in mute amazement. On July 1st, 2015, the atmosphere in the computer forensics lab was electrifying. The detectives working on Maya Thorne's case were gathered around the lead technical expert's monitor, waiting for the final piece of evidence that would solidify the case against Travis. The camera found in his trailer seemed to be the key that would lock the cell door behind the suspect forever. However, as soon as the expert pulled out the memory card and began analyzing the device's metadata, the triumph gave way to confusion and then to deep disappointment. The first discrepancy turned out to be purely technical, but critical. A closer inspection revealed that the seized camera was an old Canon PowerShot model, manufactured in 2010. According to the testimony of her colleagues and purchase documents, Maya Thorne used a professional Nikon DSLR with an expensive wide-angle lens. The external resemblance that misled the officers during a nighttime search in dim light, in daylight, and professional examination turned out to be false. But investigators still hoped that Travis could have stolen the memory card from the victim's camera and inserted it into his old machine. The expert opened the file folder. Images began to appear on the screen, but they were not landscapes for a Western movie or the last moments of Maya's life. These were hundreds of low-quality pictures of deer, squirrels, and snow-covered fir trees. An analysis of the file creation dates finally dashed the investigators' hopes. The last photo was taken in November 2014, 7 months before Maya arrived in Montana. The camera did indeed belong to Travis and did not contain a single bit of information related to the crime. While the forensic team was trying to recover from this blow, the department received information that finally shattered the version of the local recluse's involvement. Detectives checking all vehicles traveling on Route 12 on the day of the disappearance contacted a logistics company whose logging trucks operated in that sector. The company's security team provided an archive of truck dashcam footage from June 14th. One of the recordings provided an incontrovertible alibi. In a video dated at 10 o'clock in the morning, the exact time police believe Maya was attacked near her stuck Jeep, a logging truck camera captured Travis. He was on the side of a main highway, 12 miles from the crime scene. The footage clearly shows the suspect, wearing the same dirty clothes, helping an elderly couple of tourists change a flat tire on their minivan. The video recording was of high definition and contained embedded timestamps that could not be faked. The timing of the events made it physically impossible for Travis to have moved from Maya's Jeep to the highway in such a short period of time, given the condition of the forest roads and his lack of fast transportation. The man everyone thought was the monster of the Lolo forest turned out to be an ordinary, albeit unpleasant, eccentric who had done a good deed that morning. Travis had to be let go. He left the police station with a sense of triumph and threats to sue for false arrest, and the detectives were left with a broken trough. The case, which seemed almost solved, instantly turned into a dead end. The situation was getting more complicated with each passing hour. The forensic report that landed on the sheriff's desk on July 3rd was disappointing. The aggressive environment of the swamp, where the body had been for 2 weeks, had destroyed almost all biological traces. The viscous, chemically active mud acted as a solvent. No DNA samples suitable for analysis were found on the victim's clothing or skin. No fabric fibers from someone else's clothes, no hairs, no fingerprints or sweat marks. The swamp swallowed up not only Maya's life, but also the identity of her killer. Experts also did not find any epidermal particles under the girl's nails, indicating that she probably did not actively resist at the time of her death, or was unconscious. The strange detail of the upright position of the body and the traces of ligature on the hands only added to the questions. How could one person have pushed the victim so deep into the mire without leaving any signs of struggle or heavy equipment? Why did the shoes remain on his feet if the body was being dragged? Investigators returned to the crime scene again and again, but the rains that had been falling throughout June had washed away any potential tire or shoe tracks on the approaches to the dam. They had no murder weapon, no witnesses other than the silent forest, and now not even a suspect. The Maya Thorne case, which had started as a high-profile investigation, was rapidly losing momentum. Folders of documents were piling up, but they were empty of content. None of the loggers, tourists, or locals interviewed saw anything suspicious that day. The yellow Jeep stood alone, and its owner was dead, and no one could explain how or why it happened. In the investigator's office, a map of the Lolo forest hung on the wall, dotted with pins, but none of them pointed to the truth. The investigation stopped. The silence that fell in the sheriff's office was heavier than in the early days of the search. The detectives realized that somewhere out there, among the centuries-old pines and mountain roads, there was a man who knew the truth. A person who could outwit everyone without leaving a single trace, except for the body itself. And this person felt completely safe, while a small, inconspicuous detail was gathering dust in one of the boxes of physical evidence, which no one had noticed during the initial inspection of the detained driver's car in a completely different county. October of 2015 brought early frosts to Montana and thick fogs that descended on the valleys from the mountain peaks. It was a time of deafening silence and professional despair for the Missoula County investigative team working on the Maya Thorne case. 4 months had passed since the girl's body was found in a mud trap, but the investigation had not moved forward. The case has acquired the status of cold. Folders with materials were moved to the far shelves of the archive, and Maya's photos on the information boards began to fade. It seemed that Lolo Forrest, having taken the life of the young filmmaker, decided to hide the name of her killer forever. No one could have guessed that the solution to this intricate story would come not from sophisticated forensics or profilers, but from a broken light bulb on an old truck in a neighboring county. The events that changed the course of the investigation unfolded on the evening of October 17th in the small town of Superior, located in Mineral County, about 60 miles from the crime scene. It was a typical Friday night for a patrol officer on duty along a stretch of Interstate 90 and local roads. At about 22 hours and 15 minutes, the officer's attention was drawn to a dark pickup truck traveling eastbound. The car's right front headlight was not working, which was a direct violation of traffic rules. The officer turned on his flashing lights and ordered the driver to pull over. The pickup truck, an old Ford EHF 50, slowly pulled over onto the gravel. When the patrolman approached the driver's window, he noticed that the registration sticker on the license plate was 6 months overdue. Behind the wheel was a man of about 55, dressed in work overalls stained with oil and dirt. He was Dale Riggs, a heavy equipment operator who, according to documents, worked on contracts to build and repair forest roads in remote areas of the state. A routine background check that should have resulted in a fine and a warning suddenly went awry. The officer, an experienced officer with 10 years of service, immediately noticed the driver's inadequate reaction. Riggs was acting excessively nervous. His hands were visibly trembling as he handed over the driver's license. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the coolness of the car, and his eyes were constantly darting around, avoiding eye contact. The man stuttered when answering simple questions about his route and place of work. This behavior is a classic marker for the police. The driver is hiding something. Guided by suspicion and safety protocol, the officer asked Riggs to step out of the car and asked if he had any prohibited items or weapons. The driver hesitated, taking a quick glance at the glove compartment. This became the basis for a search of the cabin. The patrolman's intuition was right. There was a loaded pistol wrapped in an old rag in the glove compartment. Checking the serial number through the database showed that the weapon was not registered in the name of Dale Riggs, and he did not have a license to carry a concealed firearm. This was a serious violation of the law. At 22 hours and 40 minutes, Dale Riggs was detained, read his rights, and placed in the back of a patrol car. His pickup truck was to be towed to the impound lot. It was the procedure of inventorying the detainee's property, which is a mandatory bureaucratic routine that became the turning point the detectives had been waiting for 4 months. The car was delivered to the parking lot near the Superior Police Station. The officer on duty, who was inventorying the driver's personal belongings, methodically laid out the contents of Riggs' pockets on the table. A cheap leatherette wallet, crumpled gas station receipts, a pack of chewing gum, and a large bunch of keys. The keys jingled against the metal surface of the table, and one of the objects on the ring caught the policeman's attention. It was an unusual keychain that contrasted sharply with the rough appearance of the pickup owner. It was a small metal figure in the shape of a movie clapper, a tool used by filmmakers on set. The keychain looked worn, but the engraving on it could still be clearly read. Indie Film Fest 2014. The officer's memory flashed back to an advisory that had been sent to all state police stations back in June. It was a document labeled Wanted and dedicated to the case of Maya Thorne. In the section Special Features of Missing Items, it described in detail a set of keys to the victim's apartment in Seattle. It was noted that the ring should have a commemorative keychain from an independent film festival that Maya had attended a year before her death. The police officer froze, holding the detainee's keychain. It couldn't be a coincidence. A rough excavator operator who had spent his entire life working in Montana's lumber yards, and a souvenir from an art house film festival. These things were from different universes. The attentiveness of an ordinary officer during the routine processing of a minor offense tied together the disparate threads of the crime. The officer immediately contacted detectives in Missoula. The clock read midnight when he told his colleagues that a man was sitting in a Superior jail cell with the dead girl's belongings in his pocket. Dale Riggs, who until an hour ago thought his biggest problem was an illegal gun, had no idea that the small piece of metal on his keys had just signed his death warrant. The detectives left immediately, realizing that a random stop for a broken headlight had given them the clue they had been looking for all summer. But they didn't know that the keychain was just the tip of the iceberg of evidence that this unassuming man was hiding. On October 18, 2015, at 1:30 in the morning, a group of detectives from Missoula County arrived at the Superior Police Department. The nighttime drive took about an hour, but for the investigators, it was an unbearably long time. In the evidence bag on the front of the police car was a small metal keychain, the only clue in 4 months of deadlocked investigation. The identification procedure took place remotely, given the late hour and the emotional state of the victim's family. The detective took several detailed photos of the keychain from different angles in the bright light of a desk lamp and sent them by email to Maya Thorne's parents in Seattle. It was a short phone call from the girl's father. His voice was shaky, but his words were clear. It was definitely his daughter's. He personally gave her this souvenir after she returned from an independent film festival in 2014. Maya had never taken it off the keyring. This confirmation became the legal basis for the transition from administrative detention to a full-scale murder investigation. Dale Riggs, who had been in jail for illegal possession of weapons, officially became the main suspect in the kidnapping and murder case. But a single keychain was not enough to bring charges. The lawyer could easily claim that his client had found the keys in the woods a month ago and simply kept the keychain. The investigation needed an ironclad connection between Riggs and the crime scene on the day Maya disappeared. In the morning, investigators began to disassemble Dale Riggs' life into atoms. Inquiries went to his employer, a large construction company that maintained infrastructure in national parks. The documents they received were a real breakthrough. The work logs and travel logs of the technicians for June 2015 showed a picture that the police had missed at the initial stage, focusing on the wrong suspect. According to the company's archives, in June 2015, the region suffered from heavy rains that caused numerous landslides and erosion of forest roads. Heavy equipment was sent to the Graves Creek sector to deal with the aftermath of the weather. Dale Riggs was the operator of the crawler excavator working in this area. The detective opened a map of the forestry and compared the data from the GPS tracker of the equipment, the reports of the work performed, and the place where Maya's abandoned Jeep was found. The result forced the investigators to reconsider. On June 14th, the day the cameras captured Maya's entry into the forest, Riggs's backhoe was working to clear a debris pile just 1 mile from the point where the yellow SUV was stuck. It wasn't just proximity. It was line of sight within a single forest road. Riggs was there. He was there at the exact time that Maya Thorne turned onto the fatal dirt road, and he was driving a multi-ton machine capable of performing earthwork of any complexity. After receiving this information, the Mineral County judge did not hesitate to sign a warrant for a full search of the home, garage, and all outbuildings belonging to Dale Riggs. The forensic team arrived at his home on the outskirts of Superior at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was not an abandoned trailer like the first suspects, but a solid one-story house with a large garage workshop where the suspect spent most of his free time. The search was methodical and rigorous. The police checked every inch of space, ventilation shafts, the space under the floors, freezers. But the main focus was on the garage. The room was filled with the smell of oil, gasoline, and old metal. The walls were covered with tools, and boxes of spare parts stood on the shelves. It was the realm of a mechanic, a person who was used to working with his hands and repairing complex mechanisms. One of the detectives noticed an old red metal toolbox on a workbench in the far corner of the garage. It looked dusty, but the lock on it was new. After picking the lock, the policeman found a set of wrenches, several rolls of electrical tape, and a thick bundle of oily cloth hidden at the bottom under heavy hammers. Unfolding the cloth, the investigator saw a black, heavy, cylindrical object. It was a professional Nikon lens. It looked like a completely foreign element among the dirty tools and grease. It was an expensive, fragile optic that is usually kept in soft cases, not in a box of iron. The detective pulled out a copy of the documents for the equipment that Maya's parents had provided at the beginning of the summer. The list of stolen property included a wide-angle lens with a specific serial number. The investigator turned on a flashlight and, squinting, began to dictate the numbers engraved on the body of the found device. His partner checked each digit against the paper. 3, 5, 0, 8, 9, 2 units. The silence in the garage became dead. The serial number was a perfect match. It was Maya Thorne's lens. The suspect hadn't just found the keys on the road. He had disassembled her camera, likely throwing away the traceable body, but leaving the expensive optics behind, hoping to sell or use it someday. This discovery turned indirect suspicion into direct evidence. The investigators had a motive, a robbery that turned into a murder, or a murder to cover up another crime. But the most frightening realization came to the detectives later, when they compared all the facts. Riggs's place of work, the presence of heavy equipment, and the way Maya's body was buried. Riggs didn't dig the hole with a shovel. He didn't need to spend hours covering his tracks. He had hydraulic power at his disposal, capable of crushing stones and moving tons of earth. The found lens was only a small trophy that he took with him, but the main instrument of the crime, a huge yellow excavator, had been standing on the company's construction site all this time, as if nothing had happened. And now the investigators had to get Riggs to tell them how he had used this machine against a living person. When the detectives returned to the interrogation room where Dale Riggs was sitting, they were carrying a bag of evidence. The suspect looked up. His gaze slid over the transparent plastic, behind which a black lens was clearly visible. Riggs's complexion instantly changed from red to dead pale. He realized that his secret, hidden in an oily rag at the bottom of the box, had just been revealed. But he did not know that the police had already guessed the most horrifying detail of that day: why the girl's body was found in an upright position. A heavy silence hung in the interrogation room of the Superior Police Department, broken only by the humming of the ventilation system. On the metal table in front of Dale Riggs were photographs of the seized lens and printouts from the work log that placed his excavator within line of sight of the place where Maya Thorne disappeared. The suspect looked at his hands for a long time, rough, with fuel oil embedded under his nails, the hands of a man who had spent his life driving multi-ton machines. At 2:45 in the morning, realizing the hopelessness of his situation under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Riggs asked for water and began to speak. His confession was not a story of planned evil. It was a chronicle of a fatal confluence of circumstances, alcohol, and uncontrollable rage. According to Riggs, the morning of June 14th did not begin with coffee, but with 3 cans of cheap beer that he drank before his shift to relieve his hangover. At about 9:30, he got into the cab of his crawler excavator, having been tasked with driving the equipment to a new site to clear a rubble pile. The route took him along an old logging road, a narrow strip of gravel sandwiched between a forest wall and a steep slope. After traveling about a mile, Riggs saw an obstacle. In the middle of the road, blocking the only possible path for the large equipment, was a bright yellow Jeep Wrangler with its front axle sinking into a deep sinkhole. The driver of the excavator, irritated by the delay and the effects of alcohol, stopped the vehicle and got out to deal with the problem. Maya Thorne, who had been trying in vain to pull the car out or find a connection for more than an hour, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. At first, the appearance of the man gave her hope, but when Riggs came closer, the situation instantly escalated. Instead of helping her, he rudely demanded that she move the car off the road. Maya, smelling the pungent odor of fumes from her interlocutor, realized that she was facing a drunk driver of heavy equipment. According to Riggs's testimony, the girl started screaming. She said that he had no right to operate the excavator in that condition and threatened to report him to his superiors and the sheriff as soon as she reached the network's coverage area. For Riggs, who had already been in trouble with the law and was hanging on to this job as a last resort, these words were a trigger. Fear of losing everything mixed with alcoholic aggression. He didn't remember exactly what happened in detail, but investigators reconstructed the picture. Riggs grabbed a heavy metal fixture that he always carried in his cab for minor truck repairs. One sharp, sweeping blow to the head cut off the girl's scream. Maya fell to the wet ground near the open door of her Jeep. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. The realization of what he had done came instantly. Riggs checked for a pulse. There was none. He was standing in the middle of the woods, with a corpse at his feet and a witness's car on the road. Prison seemed inevitable, unless he could make it all disappear. His eyes fell on the excavator, a tool he knew better than his own body. He knew this area like the back of his hand. He knew about the Black Trap, a swampy lowland near an old dam where the mud was deep and never dried. What happened next explained the most horrifying mystery of the investigation: the unnatural position of the body and the absence of the perpetrator's DNA on the victim's clothes. Riggs did not carry the body in his arms. He didn't drag it along the ground, leaving drag marks. He used an excavator bucket. In cold blood, as he had done thousands of times with logs or rocks, he loaded the girl's body into the metal bucket of the machine. He drove the excavator about 2 miles to a swampy lowland, avoiding the main trails. When he reached the edge of the marsh, he turned the boom of the excavator around. Riggs realized that simply throwing the body into the swamp was not enough. It could float up or be spotted from the air. He needed to bury it deep. He dumped the body into the viscous mud. It began to sink slowly, but not fast enough. Then Riggs used the hydraulic power of his machine. He lowered a heavy steel bucket on top of the body, which was already partially submerged in the mud. The pressure of several tons transmitted through the hydraulics acted ruthlessly. The excavator literally drove Maya Thorne's body into the bottom of the swamp, like driving a pile in a construction site. It was this mechanical pressure from above that explained the vertical position of the body, head down. The bucket pressed on her legs, forcing her body to enter the dense layers of silt, flat and deep. This also explained why the girl's arms were stretched out along her body. They were pinned down by layers of mud during the rapid submergence under pressure. The gruesome marks on her body, which experts initially mistook for possible post-mortem injuries from the fall, turned out to be the marks of the bucket's teeth. With the job done, Riggs flattened the surface of the bog with the same bucket, destroying any visual evidence of soil disturbance. Then he returned to the Jeep, took the backpack, camera, and keys from the cabin to simulate a robbery or the girl's voluntary departure, and continued his work shift. He was confident that the swamp would keep his secret safe, and the rains would wash away the tracks. Riggs finished his story by staring at the table. He thought he had defeated nature and the system by using brute mechanical force against fragile human life. But he hadn't taken into account one thing. Even a body perfectly hidden in the bowels of the earth can eventually speak, and the small, sentimental trinket he greedily kept as a trophy would outweigh 15 tons of steel and hydraulics. The trial of Dale Riggs began in February 2016 in the Mineral County District Court. The case, which began as a mysterious disappearance of a young girl in the Montana woods, had turned into one of the most high-profile criminal trials in the state's history by the time of the first hearing. The courtroom was packed with journalists, locals, and Maya Thorne's relatives, who flew in from Seattle to face the man who made their lives hell. Riggs's defense strategy was based on an attempt to recant the initial confessions made during the night interrogation. The defendant's lawyers tried to convince the jury that the tragedy on the forest road was a fatal accident, not a premeditated murder. According to the new version of the defense, Maya provoked the conflict herself, and Riggs, being under severe stress and intoxication, only defended himself or pushed her, which led to a fall and a fatal injury. His subsequent actions, hiding the body with an excavator, were called by his lawyers a panic reaction of a frightened man who did not realize the consequences of his actions. However, this version fell apart under the pressure of forensic evidence presented by the prosecution. On the third day of the hearings, the state's chief pathologist showed the jury detailed images of the victim's skull. The nature of the fractures of the parietal and temporal bones indicated that the blow had been inflicted with great force by a heavy metal object with a sharp edge. This was fully consistent with the configuration of the mount taken from the excavator cab and refuted the version of an accidental fall on the stones. The trajectory of the blow indicated that the attacker struck from above, purposefully and brutally. But the jury was most impressed, not by the fact of the murder itself, but by the cynical and industrial way in which Riggs disposed of the body. In his speech, the prosecutor called the defendant's actions an act of complete dehumanization. He emphasized that the use of heavy construction equipment to push a person into the mud showed cold calculation, not panic. Riggs didn't just hide the body. He used 15 tons of hydraulic force to erase Maya's very existence. A separate point of the indictment was the physical evidence found. The presence of an expensive lens and a keychain in Riggs's garage finally destroyed the image of a frightened hard worker. A person in a panic does not search a corpse or take souvenirs. These were the actions of a marauder who, having killed a person, decided to benefit materially from it. The psychological portrait of Riggs, drawn up by profilers, painted him as a sociopath capable of extreme violence for his own safety. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Dale Riggs was found guilty of second-degree murder, concealment of evidence, and illegal possession of a firearm. During the verdict announcement, the defendant sat motionless, looking at the table, and showed no emotion. At the sentencing stage, the judge made a speech that made headlines in local newspapers. He noted that he had seen a lot of cruelty in his career, but the use of an excavator to bury the victim was an example of absolute indifference to human life. Given the gravity of the crime and attempts to mislead the investigation, The judge imposed the maximum possible sentence. Dale Riggs was sentenced to 45 years in a maximum security prison without the possibility of early release during the first 30 years. For a 55-year-old man, this effectively meant life in prison. He left the courtroom in handcuffs, and that was the last time he saw the free world. The consequences of this tragedy went far beyond the courtroom. Maya Thorne's family, trying to find meaning in the senseless loss, established a charity fund in her name. The organization began to provide grants to young women filmmakers working in the independent film genre, helping them realize their dreams, which were so suddenly cut short for Maya. The U.S. Forest Service also responded to the incident. The old logging road in the Lolo National Forest, where the tragedy occurred, was declared unsafe and closed to civilian traffic. A massive metal barrier and warning signs were installed at the entrance. The place where the yellow Jeep had stopped forever gradually began to grow over with grass and young pines, returning to its wild state. Maya Thorne's case became a cautionary tale for Montanans and law enforcement across the country. It reminded us that even in the most complex investigations, when high technology, profiling, and large-scale searches lead to a dead end, the human factor can play a decisive role. Thousands of hours of work by detectives, helicopters, and dog handlers proved to be powerless against the silence of the forest. The killer, who believed himself to be the elusive master of the mountains, was not exposed by a sophisticated special operation, but by a broken headlight bulb on an old truck and the attentiveness of one patrolman on the night road. The story ended where it began, in the silence of the Lolo forest. Justice was served, but it had a bitter taste. The gorge has retained its beauty, but now everyone who passes by the old barrier involuntarily recalls the girl who came here to make a movie and became the heroine of the most terrible story in real life.